Hello, Maine. I am so bummed not to be there with you in person. I've heard Maine is beautiful. So I'm so bummed not to be there with you, but thank you so much for tuning in. I owe a great deal of thanks to Phyllis and Beth and Kim and Casco and Maine Prevention Services and anybody else who had any hand in putting this whole thing together. I know these things are long and tedious and difficult to put together, and my part's the easy part. So the folks who put this together, they've done all the heavy lifting. So thank you so much. I understand that some of you, can you hear me okay? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the book, and I'm going to leave you with some tips that you can use now, tonight, in your home, where I know you already are, because we're in these very, very difficult times. I just want to make sure we're good and we can hear each other. Are we okay? I can't tell, but so I'm going to go on the assumption, because I don't hear you, but oh, I see a thumbs up. I'm going with it. Thank you. Thank you for logging on tonight. It's important that you guys are here. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a therapist here outside Chicago, which is in the Midwest.
Okay. Mr. Duffy, you muted yourself by accident. We can't hear you.
My gosh.
Thank you.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're good.
Did you guys hear the part about the very most important thing you can do in parenting? Did you catch that? I'm kidding. I'm sorry. I was saying that I'm really, really glad you logged in, because I'm worried about our kids collectively for the first time in my 25 years of private practice. And I mean all of them, because they are in this new age of anxiety. I wrote this book back here recently. I know a lot of you have read it in a much smaller form, but it's called Parenting the New Teen at the Age of Anxiety. And there are a whole lot of issues that our teens are dealing with now that as of just a few years ago, they weren't dealing with at all. So we have an awful lot to learn from these people, from our kids. We're the first generation of parents who have to learn from our kids what's it like to be a teenager in the world today. So I thought about, like, how do I give the folks in Maine an idea of what I'm seeing here? And I realized I have allowed for some time now my young clients to text me if they're having a hard time or if something's on their mind. I find that that's a good place. That's a kind of a placeholder for them. They know in the next session we'll get to it. So I'm going to read to you some of the texts that I've received from kids. And I want you to keep in mind, I've received all of these before the pandemic hit. So this is, I can't imagine if I read to you what was going on now, but we'll get to that. But right now, I'm going to read to you a few texts that I've received from kids before the pandemic. Hey, Dr. Duffy, I just can't help but feel that a lot of the people I talk to think I'm an uninteresting person. This might sound weird, but I feel like I'm going to end up looking like I'm in my 40s by the time I'm 20 because of the stress I'm under all the time. So I just stress out even more thinking about that. Life just sucks, and everyone around me sucks too. I don't know why I stick around. And I want you to listen to a couple of these texts and just think about whether you even had this thought in your mind when you were a teenager. I don't think my parents know how hard this is for me. They think I'm bad, just bad. I'm super sad about everything right now, but my parents say I should move on. I don't know how to do that when I have no friends. Move on to what? My parents hate me because I didn't go to school. I'm a wreck, man. I don't know what's wrong with me. I need so much help. I'm anxious all day long, and that makes me depressed. Does it ever really get better? Yo, teenagers, Sorry for the random late night texts I keep sending you. This, by the way, was about 2:30 in the morning in the middle of a school week back when there were school weeks. Sorry for the random late night texts I keep sending you, but school just makes me feel so miserable. I really don't know if I can make it through the whole school year feeling like this. I can't help thinking I'm going to die soon. Think about when you were a teenager. Did you feel that way? Not many of us did. Did we know anybody who felt that way? A lot of people I talk to would say no. Now, I don't know many kids who haven't run into that. Hey, can you meet this week? My friend tried to kill himself and I didn't answer his message. I feel super guilty about it. I'm not going to do anything, don't worry. But dying in my sleep would be the easiest thing. Everyone would feel better. And finally, and this feels a little bit more universal than it did just a few years ago. I'm just so unhappy right now. Everything is crappy. My life and the world. I'm not suicidal. I just don't want to be alive, you know? And that idea of passive suicidality, I refer to it a couple of times in the book. This is new. This wasn't around a few years ago where I'm not going to do anything, but I don't want to be alive. So we're talking a lot tonight, I think, about drugs, drug use, drug abuse. And part of what spurs that is that very feeling, right? You know, that feeling of like, I'm not sure I have a place here. I'm not sure I belong here. I'm not sure I feel good about myself here. So those are some of the texts. And then every morning in my practice, in my office here, and I'm in my office, it's sanitized. I'm the only person in the building, but I can get away and practice my tele sessions in peace and quiet. So I just want you to know I'm not violating anything, but that's where I am now. And every morning in here, the calls come in. And the calls are like this. Dr. Duffy, she won't get out of bed. Dr. Duffy, he says that he is miserable and unhappy. Do we need to get to the ER right away? She thinks she's going to hurt herself. We're not going to be able to make it to school. Can we set up an appointment with you today? We are in crisis here. Families are in crisis like they never have been before, never. And this part is absolutely new. And it's really difficult to know what to do in crisis because we make our worst decisions in the face of crisis. So we have an awful lot to learn from our kids about what this means and what we can do about it. Okay, so you can already tell that a lot of what I'm going to talk about here tonight is not going to be the easiest stuff to hear. But I want you to hang in here. Do not log off early because you'll miss the good stuff. So please hang in here with me and we will get to the good stuff because in every dark point that I'm going to bring up here, there is a note of light and I don't want you to miss a single note of it because there's an awful lot of agency that we as parents have in our homes and maybe in our homes right now. And I don't want to miss out on any of it. A little backstory really quickly on me. I never had any intention whatsoever of writing a second parenting book. I wrote one about a decade ago. I actually have a visual for you guys. So I wrote this book, if you can see it, it's called The Available Parent. And I thought this was my last word in parenting because in this book, I made this argument. And I thought it was airtight. My point was, if you can parent as reasonably free as possible from your own fear and your own judgment and your own ego, things are going to go pretty smoothly. Now, that's a lot to ask. I get. Consider for just a moment your fear, the fears you have for your kids. I'm afraid my kids aren't going to thrive. I'm afraid they're going to fall into drug use and abuse. I'm afraid they're going to have the wrong friends. They're going to get bullied. They're going to be unhappy, right? There's an awful lot of fear to get past there. Our own judgment. We judge ourselves as parents. I don't think I'm doing a very good job here. We judge our kids. I hear a lot of parents saying, I'm killing it as a parent. You, my child, could be doing a far better job with the great job of parenting I'm doing. And then our ego. I've had plenty of parents say, hey, if you did 10 minutes of homework, maybe I could get a Princeton sticker on the back of my car too. So it's tough to take fear and judgment and ego and put them aside. But in the book, I'm not asking you to be perfect at that, but to put it aside some of the time. The idea being that you develop this balance, this nice, rich balance in the emotional bank account. So you're in the black, not way down here in the red. And you're connecting with your kids. You are the ally and the guide and the consultant that your child needs. That's not a promise that you'd never see on a report card or find a vape or a jewel in the car, or have that drunken night. But by and large, things stay in the lane they're supposed to be in, and you and your child are allies to the point that maybe 20 years from now on Thanksgiving, your child will bring their children to your home all dressed up and scrubbed up because they want to, not out of obligation, just like, of course, you do with your parents. Maybe. But I will tell you that there's an awful lot I did not know 10 years ago when I published The Available Parent. I didn't know what vaping was. I didn't know what juuling was. I didn't know that our kids were going to become so keenly aware of any mental health and mental illness malady that they could possibly fall into: depression, anxiety, attention issues, hopelessness, suicidality. Kids understand these terms. They know them in a way that we did not know these things when we were kids, and they're sticky for them. In other words, they will Google it and WebMD it and join groups online. Hey, I have an eating disorder too. Hey, I'm anxious and depressed too. And they'll join groups on Snapchat and Instagram, and this will become an integral part of their identity. I didn't know 10 years ago that that was going to happen. I didn't know 10 years ago that our kids were going to be so familiar with all the medications and drugs affiliated with each of these maladies, and that a lot of us know they would have ready access to it, not necessarily from a prescribing psychiatrist, but from the kid down the hall or the kid next to them in class, right? I didn't know that was going to happen. I didn't know school shootings and mass shootings were going to become part of the regular vernacular for our kids. I didn't know video games were going to become as addictive as a lot of the drugs we're going to talk about are. I didn't know our kids were going to run into academic stress beyond what they had a decade ago. And it was pretty bad back then. It was pretty heavy. I didn't know that our kids were going to run into social stressors from virtually every corner of their lives, including social media. I didn't know that social media was going to play this prominent role in the self-worth and the self-esteem of our kids. I didn't know that our kids were going to run into what one girl I worked with brilliantly coined identity traffic. I have all these identities, Dr. Duffy, that I have to keep track of. My identity with my parents, with my siblings, with my classmates, with my coaches, with my teachers, with my friends, with my other friends, with my friends online, and then finally, at the end of the day, with myself. And I have to keep all these identities up in the air and keep control of them while I'm still trying to live my life underneath it all. Effectively, I didn't know that our kids were going to be so stressed and anxious and overwhelmed from the moment they woke up in the morning until the moment they laid their heads down to sleep at night, never knowing what it feels like to be off the grid. And I mean that quite literally. A lot of our kids really don't know what it feels like to be off the grid. How bizarre and wretched is that? How anxiety provoking must that be for our kids? And let's be honest, you guys, I want to say this took a decade to materialize between these two books, but the truth is, we all know that most of this change has taken place in the last 3 or 4 years on the long end. And we're on a trajectory where things are going to continue to change a great deal. So I'm giving you the bad news first here, but we'll get to the good stuff. The trajectory looks like this. We know that Snapchat and TikTok and Instagram are not the last social media platforms that our kids are going to run into, and that they are going to be more drawn to the next ones, and they're going to have more play on their self-worth and self-esteem. We know that Fortnite, for example, is not the last video game that's going to be created in $1 billion industry, right? This is good. They're going to be one iteration after the next. And they're really, really clever when they develop these games in making the next one more addictive than the last one. We also probably know that the APA, a group that I belong to, is oh, good. Somebody new is here. Hello. We know that the APA, a group that I belong to, is coming up with new diagnoses specifically directed toward our kids, and that there are drug companies that might not be right now involved in the development of vaccines coming up with treatments for those maladies specifically, pills that our kids will take for something that hasn't even been coined yet. So we're on a sharp trajectory, and it's going to continue to change that way. Our kids are not at the end of the stress threshold. They're somewhere on the upward curve, right? And when you add a global pandemic that has no end date right now for our kids, and they're holed up with their families, and they have all the affiliated stresses and losses and family difficulties affiliated with that, I don't know how sharp a curve we're looking at, but it is ever more sharp. So this is escalating, and we have to be aware that the stressors that our kids are going through are escalating. This is not a steady state. So as I said in The Available Parent, we absolutely need to keep our fear, our judgment, our ego in check so that we have a powerful emotional bank account going with each of our kids, because we're going to need that. We're going to need that leverage with them. But as a nod to the new book, we're also going to need to know what's going on in their lives now. And that's going to require a lot of listening and a lot of compassion, a lot of empathy. And this book is not just about anxiety, like that's diagnosable, the panic disorder and, OCD and the like. It's also about just the world our kids inhabit and how very anxiety provoking that world is, and their inclination and propensity to self-medicate their way through it. And that's what we're looking to mitigate, at least in part, here tonight. And we're going to make progress here. We're going to make headway. So that was going great. I was on this book tour, and I was killing it about 3 months ago. And I was going to be in Maine, I think tonight. And I was going to be in DC, I think tomorrow night. And this was going gangbusters. And as those of you who've been following the headlines now know, something happened. This pandemic hit, right? And changed the whole thing, changed the way we live on a dime, right? And so I had to go back to my book. And with a great deal of anxiety, I go to look at this book and I'm thinking, do these principles even apply here? Because I think I remember writing something about 2 hours on screen time is the most you could possibly have and still stay emotionally healthy. And I think I might feel a little differently now. But when I look at the fundamentals of that book, every single one of them applies, more so now than they did in the past. It is really, really more important that we understand what's going on in the lives of our kids now. And I am finding, doing therapy with teens and tweens and young adults now, that we can't make any assumptions about what's going on in their lives, because I've made a lot of guesses about what's stressing kids out when I'm sitting across from somebody or I'm Zoom calling them. And by and large, my guesses are wrong. So we have to ask, we have to learn from them, what's this like for you? And we've never been here before. So some of us could say, well, I was a teenager once. I have some feel for what that's like. But none of us, not a single one of the people on this call, was a teenager during a pandemic, sheltering in place with their family. We don't know what this is like. We have to learn it from them, because our guesses might be off. And then if we act on those, we might be doing something that's counterproductive and our child doesn't feel heard. And if you hear nothing else from me tonight, I want you to know that your child needs to feel heard. So the good news is that the book is not defunct. What you read still stands, and there's a framework there for the way that you are going to approach your kids moving forward into the future. And I want you to keep that framework in mind as we go here. It's really, really critically important. And I also want to point out that with the right energy and the right tone, you have a lot of agency over how things go. Now, I'm going to get deep into how you can exercise that agency because I work with a lot of parents who feel powerless to even make their voices heard in the minds of their kids when it comes to changing any behavior, whether it's drug use or getting e-learning done or not hitting a brother or sister or whatever it is right now. But your voice is more important than any other voice in the lives of your kids. So I want you to keep that in mind because we're all experiencing something profound here and new. We're all experiencing losses. We're all experiencing a great deal of fear. Keep in mind that we all started this 8, 9, 10 weeks ago, idling on high. And one of the things I'm going to encourage you to do tonight is to check in with yourself, because I'm going to point out that you are the emotional leaders of your home, and you need to know where you are emotionally. And that means talking to a spouse or somebody you really trust who's an adult, or a therapist, because these telesessions are very, very effective. But you need to know where you are. You need to be standing on relatively solid ground, because I had an infectious disease doctor that I talked to the other day, and he suggested best case scenario, we're in the 4th inning. So we've got a long way to go in sheltering in place and being with our kids. And you can feel that things might be deteriorating over time. You need to be strong. Not that you don't have a million other things you need to do as well, but strength has to be one of them. So I want you to remember a couple of things. This pandemic is temporary. By all accounts, this is not going to last forever. But it's going to last a while. Again, think 4th inning, right? Think that, we're somewhere in the middle of this thing, and there is an end, but we don't know when that is. And that uncertainty is difficult. And we can point to some awful things, right? People are losing their lives. People are ill. People are losing their jobs. The economy is suffering. All sorts of things are going sideways. But if you think in the macro and you consider, the micro, and you consider opportunity, what opportunity is available to you and your family during this highly unusual time when you will likely never, ever in your lifetime spend this kind of time concentrated with your family. A lot of you might be thinking, I hope not. I hope that never happens again, because this is wildly unnatural and we are not faring very well. But I'm going to point out a couple opportunities here that are really, really important. For example, I talked to a mom yesterday who was lamenting that she was doing a terrible job guiding her kids through the e-learning process here in Chicago. And we kind of came up with this idea that that's not the most important thing. And the likelihood that her sophomore is going to learn calculus in these weeks is pretty unlikely. But will she learn something about her own competence, her own resilience, the resilience of other people, the goodness of other people, the greater good, and the contribution she can make to it? Yes, there's an awful lot we can put together here that is good, right? About, bear with me just a second here. About 20 years ago, when I was starting my career, a colleague of mine and I were going to schools, and our pitch was, you need to teach social emotional learning in your classes. This is going to pay off huge dividends. This is a big part of what's going to make the children successful over the long run, and competent and resilient and less drug dependent. All sorts of good things will help happen. My timing was awful, and a lot of teachers kind of laughed me out of classrooms, and deans and administrators laughed me out of buildings. Now, I think it might be time for that. So either in the household or in the school or both, I think we have this opportunity for enormous social and emotional growth. Um, Now I want to return to this idea that you are the emotional leaders in your home. Um, in my practice here in Chicago, a few unfortunate things have been happening as the weeks wear on through the pandemic. Um, I noticed that family systems that are not great at communicating with one another and don't have a lot in the emotional bank account are running into trouble sheltering in place. They're not navigating it well. They're losing their emotional resources very quickly. I have had, in the last 6 weeks of my career, more calls to the Department of Children and Family Services here in Illinois and to local police stations than I ever have collectively in my career. So, what does that tell us? That tells us that families are not faring well here. And sometimes that leads to really very dangerous situations. Um, we parents have the luxury and the responsibility of being the emotional leaders of our homes. So, as much as a lot of us think our kids do not follow our leads, they do. This is true, by the way, of substance use and abuse an awful lot of the time as well, as a side note. But our kids follow our leads. So if we are in crisis mode for 2 months straight, something is going to go sideways in your home. We do not survive crises very well. We need to think of different ways to conceptualize this time. We really do need to look at it as a new temporary normal and take this time and put it off to the side for our family and for ourselves so that we can be competent and resilient and we can model this for our kids. Because I think a lot of parents don't believe me when I say your kids are going to follow your model more than they're going to follow their best friends or the group at school, or their favorite rock star or their favorite rapper. They are far, far more likely to follow your lead. So we want to lead with calm and resolve and finding the best in a difficult situation. Think about how big an opportunity this is to shift gears in your family, especially if you feel things haven't been going so well around here. This opportunity to shift the tone is invaluable. So I really encourage you to pause on that for a moment and think about the power that you have to make that kind of difference in your family. Don't forget, you're going to remember this time for the rest of your life. 2020 will be remembered as this time, and your kids, they will look back on the pandemic of 2020, and their kids will ask them, what was that like? And I think you want them to tell a pretty good story here, given how awful the big story is. I hope that makes sense to you guys. We are the emotional leaders of our homes. So I want to give you a few tips that you can work with going forward here. And then I want to hear any questions, thoughts, comments, answers that any of you have, because I want you to complete this evening feeling like I got what I needed here. This was useful. Forgive me that. So let's talk about some solutions. What are some things that we can do now and during calmer times that are going to help us through this age of anxiety for our very, very stressed kids? The first thing I want you to picture is the vibe in your home. A couple of us were talking about this actually before we started recording. This is a big deal. A lot of kids tell me that when they cross the threshold into their home, that's where their stress level goes up. That's not their sanctuary. That's where they get stressed out. We need to reverse that formula if that's the case in our homes. So how do we do that? Pay attention to what your child gets when he or she walks in, right? Do they get that kind of like dead quiet, like, oh, it's you, hey, or nothing? Is it dead? Is it that quiet? Can you hear a clock ticking on the wall? Is it blaringly loud? Are people arguing and debating? And is a TV on, some 24-hour news channel talking about Armageddon that's taking place right now? That might not be a very calming sanctuary-like vibe either. Is it combative? Would you say to your child, hey, I was looking at the portals today and I noticed some missing math assignments. Do you want to tell me all about that? That is not a very welcoming vibe, right? The metric I encourage parents to attend to is if your child walks into your house and heads right up the stairs before they say a thing, no, hi mom, I'm good, I'm not hungry, just got to talk to some friends, have a whole bunch of homework to do, bye, you probably want to change the tone. So how do you find a tone that works? It's a fair question. Think about a tone and a vibe that works for you, right? So have a look around your house at a time when nobody's around. I get that that's not tomorrow or the next day or the next day, but sometime where it's relatively quiet or some of your family is sleeping. And think about whether this is a place that gives you sanctuary, that makes you feel calm. Because I want you to remember that outside the door of your home for your children, it is super noisy. School's noisy. Maybe not the streets right now, but by and large, just being out is noisy. And they are criticizing themselves kind of constantly. They have noise in their head. There's noise on the street. There's noise in school. They're working through that identity traffic. Home has got to be sanctuary. So this is crucial for them. So think about what would bring you sanctuary. What brings you calm? A little bit of music, right? Maybe a TV on quietly, maybe no noise at all, maybe a little different configuration of furniture. This may not seem like a big deal. And I'm not suggesting that you get out the weighted blankets and the scented candles and you have a seance and you do ohms. You don't have to do all that, but make sure it's sanctuary. Make sure it's a relaxing, peaceful, happy place to be, because right now, this is the only place your kids have to be and the only place you have to be. So create a sanctuary, create a place where you all want to be. And you know what? This would not be a bad family project or a family discussion to engage in. Are we happy in here? Do we like the way this is laid out? Is this a happy place to be? And if not, what can we do to change that? And let your kids in on this conversation, because kids as young as 6 or 7 or 8, they know a lot. And they might have some feedback that surprises you. So do not write off any of your kids all the way up into the 20s. Good. So the vibe in your home, that's important. The next piece I want to talk about, the next tip I have for you, and this is a pretty good hack. When your child walks through the door, what do they get from you? Do you light up when you see her? If my wife, Julie, were in this room right now, she would commandeer the microphone and say, step aside. This is the most important thing you have to say. John, you do not emphasize this enough, so make it a point. So Julie's not here. I'm going to make a point of this. Kids tell me that they can go through an entire day outside of the pandemic where nobody lights up for them. Not a teacher, not a peer, not a friend, not another student, not a coach, not themselves. And they feel less than an awful lot of the time. So it is imperative that you light up for them. What does that mean? That means that on the worst day, when the police have brought them home because there's been some infraction, or you've looked at the portal and you see 20 missing assignments, or they've disappointed you over the weekend coming home inebriated, whatever it is, on the worst day, your child needs to know, hey, I see you, I love you, and you and I work good. So you've got to cut through all that chaff between you and her or you and him and be really clear, like, hey, there might be 50 things that need to change in our relationship. 50 things you specifically need to change, but I got you and I love you and we're good. Think about how important that is, how much that cuts through for a kid, just to hear those words during these stressful times. I hear you, I love you, You and I, we're good. I got you. Huge, right? This is a big, big deal on the worst day. Now, some of you might say, that's really hard for me. I remember the day the lights went out. I remember the day when he or she left their phone on and I could see the Snapchat that was racist or misogynistic or pornographic or awful. I've heard them say terrible things with their friends. I have found the vape and the jewel in the car. And so instead of lighting up, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to levy consequences. I'm going to take all the game controllers out of this house. I'm going to lock them in the trunk of the car, and I'm going to turn off the Wi-Fi until the end of time. And I'll take all the doors off the hinges until I can think of something more awful to do to you people. And those of you who are trying to think of consequences in the midst of a pandemic, good luck to you. It's very hard to come by since we're all grounded. And in the meantime, some parents will say, and I will stay cold for that child. I will greet that child with my cold, dead eyes until they improve, until they are good enough and they meet my metric. And I get it. A lot of us were raised that way, so I understand the thinking. We do not have the luxury of that thinking right now. Our kids are already up to here with stress and some self-loathing. We can't add to that. We've got to be the people who light up for them. There's a phrase that I'm sure a number of you have heard, but I'm going to say it anyway. Unconditional positive regard. Not that you're not parenting, not that you don't get to say, hey, a whole bunch of stuff needs to change. And I'm not very happy with you, but I love you. I got you. We're good. That always has to be the bottom line. I apologize for beating that dead horse. Send any complaints to Julie Duffy at gmail.com. Okay. Thank you for hanging in so far, guys. I hope we're doing okay. The next thing I want to see you do with your kids is I want your children moving and I want your kids busy. This is particularly difficult in the midst of a shelter-in-place order, but I'm going to point to the importance of this. If there is a remedy, one thing you could do to keep your child off my couch across the hall in my therapy room, it would be to get them exercising and sweating on a daily basis. Now, I can think of dozens of initial sessions across the hall there, back when people used to show up in here, where parents would tell me, oh, this one is not my athlete. Like, you know, he's a little heavy, she's a little clumsy. They have a lot of really, really great things about them, but
I'm going. Come on, baby. We're in the middle of the game.
Someone heard that. That was great.
It's okay. Can you hear me? I can see you. And hi, how's it going? I'm going to keep talking. So I've worked with parents who have. I am unmuted by the host. Okay. So certainly flag me or something if you cannot hear me, unless you don't want to, in which case absolutely keep me muted. So I want your kids moving and I want your kids busy. A lot of parents make this assumption because their child is not the lacrosse star or the fastest kid in school or the lightest kid in school or the livest kid in school that they can't move. And a lot of kids are leading very, very sedentary lives. I have never seen it more than I've seen it in the last 8 weeks. I can think of a number of teenagers I'm working with who during week 1 of the shelter-in-place order, they were sitting as upright and rigid as I am right now, and they were ready to go. Dr. Duffy, what are we talking about today? They were bright-eyed, and they were upset about the pandemic, but kind of stoked not to be in school. So that was week 1. Week 2, there might be a little more like, yo, Dr. Duffy, what's up? How's it going, man? Now come week 8 or 9, and a number of kids start sessions in bed. They're literally waking up, whether it's 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 6, they're in bed, and I have to tell them, you're not going to do a session in bed, get up. And the idea is These kids way too many kids lead sedentary lives. And think about that young body and all the anxiety that is building up in that kid during those sedentary days. And a lot of our kids have long sedentary days. And during the pandemic, a lot of parents are kind of giving a pass to that because a lot of we therapists are saying, whatever happens right now, it's fine. We'll figure it out on the back end. Not this part. This part is important. I want to hear that your kids are moving virtually every single day of their lives. It's tricky, right? Because a shelter in place order. We're not supposed to leave the house. But some of us have equipment in the basement. Some of us can play tag in the yard. And if you think your teenager won't play, they might, because they've got no other options to do anything with people. They'll ride their bikes. They'll ride the Peloton if you've got one of those. Be creative here, but get your kids active. One family I'm working with got super creative and put their 2 strong teenage boys in charge of building a deck. And you know what? They're all about it. They're working out all day, sweating all day. And think about what happens for you when you go out. So when I'm done with sessions for the day, a little later tonight, I'll go out for a run. And my mind will clear. And I will gain some perspective that I wouldn't have otherwise. And I bet most every adult who goes out during the day and does something physical can say the same. Every kid I work with who does this can do the same. So it helps you mentally and emotionally and physically. So there is no downside. Do not decide what your child is not. And I don't mean just not an athlete. Most of our kids have a lot of abilities that we cut them out of, music or math or a whole bunch of different things. But for now, let's just focus on the fact that your non-athletic child can be an athlete. I worked with a boy last night who took his first Peloton ride on his mom's bike and texted me afterwards and said, you know what? That was pretty good. He is 17. And to hear him tell it, he has never really exercised a day in his life. And he wants to, and he feels different. So that is no small thing. Let's get rid of some of that anxious energy and find different ways to cope. So we're not turning to drugs or alcohol, pills, this stuff that's really, really maladaptive for us. Usually I ask audiences at this point, how we doing? Are we good? I'm going on the assumption that you guys are 100% on board and that there might even be some applause going on out there. So excellent. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do and attend to is listening. And the first time I gave this talk, my book came out September 15th of this year. And I gave a talk to an audience of 500 that day. And I said, I want you listening better. And a guy in the audience yelled out of nowhere, heckled me, and said, oh, brilliant. The therapist wants us to listen. Big surprise. And I get it. But sometimes we don't listen well. Let me explain. I have a very close friend. Her name is Kathy Adams. Some of you may be familiar with Kathy. For those of you who listen to Zen Parenting Radio, it's a podcast she does with her husband, Todd. They do a conference here in Chicago called the Zen Parenting Conference. I strongly, strongly recommend it. So Kathy, the parenting guru, has a teenage daughter. Her daughter came up to her and said, Mom, I don't like Sundays. And in an effort to align with her daughter, the very good listening Kathy was about to say, you know what, honey, I totally get it. You're not prepared for the week ahead. You have assignments still due. You don't know what's coming up next weekend. You and I are the same. You get the Sunday blues. I totally understand. But Kathy stopped herself and she kind of gut checked. And instead of just saying that, she said to her daughter, honey, why don't you like Sundays? And to hear Kathy tell it, everything her daughter said after that, Kathy had never experienced before. She'd never heard it before. Sometimes when we don't listen well, we miss it. And it's important. So sometimes people will ask me right now, like, so what? We're parents. My parents didn't listen that well to me all the time. If you miss it a little bit, what's the big deal? Who cares? Here's why it matters. Sometimes, and this is big, you guys, sometimes your child just need space to say the thing. Just to say the thing. And the thing might not be the thing you want to hear your child say. It's usually about him or her, and it goes something like this. I don't like myself very much. I'm fat. I'm stupid. I'm ugly. I don't think other people like me. I screwed up really, really bad. You know what? I just don't think I'm good enough. Hard stuff for parents to hear, right? But if we can take that, hold it, curate that thought, our kids can move on. That is catharsis for them. They don't need us to fix it. They don't need us to do anything with it, but hold that thought that you're not good enough. I'm so sorry you feel that way, honey. I'll acknowledge that. I got it. I hear you. And your kid can move on with their lives. But our inclination is not to acknowledge and validate that thought. Our inclination as parents, of course, is to talk them out of it, right? No, no, no. You're smart and you're beautiful and you're fun and you're funny. And if they don't want to hang out with you, that's their loss and their problem. That makes sense. That seems like the right thing to do, right? But when we do that, we're effectively saying, you know what? You came to me with this thing and I can't handle the thing. I probably am not going to be able to handle the next thing, so don't come to me with it. And I don't know a better recipe for depression, anxiety, hopelessness for our kids than to go to a parent with a thing that concerns you deeply about yourself and have it effectively rejected. This happens all the time because we want our kids to feel good about themselves, not awful, right? What kids do when they have this thing is they go to other kids, right? Hey, can you help me with this thing? My mom, my dad, I talk to them. They're not hearing me. They're not getting it. I loathe this idea. Kids are amazing at their willingness to be de facto therapists for one another. I'm blown away by it. I don't think my generation was very generous with this idea, but kids are willing to listen to each other at 2 o'clock in the morning if their friend is having a difficult time. The thing is, I went to grad school for 5 years to do what I do. I wrote a 150-page dissertation, and I've been practicing for a quarter century. And still, sometimes I feel a little over my skis when I'm working with a 15-year-old who's having a hard time. So I don't want kids to have this responsibility. It's unreasonable. It's unfair, even if they're willing to do it. And it's really, really dangerous. The better story is that you're the one who holds that. That is an enormous deposit in the emotional bank account with your kid. And it really, really does a lot to enhance your connection. I said the thing, mom didn't explode. I think things are going to be okay. And you guys, here's the sick, dirty little secret of doing therapy with teens and tweens and young adults. This is all we do. All we do when we're swiping your credit card hour after hour is we are creating space for your child to say the thing and to leave it with us. I'm happy to charge you to do that, but I should probably drive Uber or something. I should probably be looking for other work, because the better story is that they say the thing and they share the thing with you and you help them work through it, or at the very least you hold it for them. That's big. So I hope I'm clear. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you get that because that is therapy and that is parenting. Now, I have one or two other thoughts I want to share with you before we talk about questions and answers. I want to make sure that your questions are covered. So I'll be brief here. Some parents will tell me, yeah, you don't get it, Duffy. My kid is not going to tell me the thing. And I know that's true in an awful lot of families where you feel like I've blown it, I've lost their trust, we're not connected the way you're talking about. I follow this 90-10 rule when it comes to parenting. So hang in here with me. 90% of the time that you spend with your child, especially during a pandemic, I will add, 90% should be hanging out with them, playing with them, getting into their world, listening to their music, watching their shows, asking about their lives and really getting into it. Celebrating those parts of them that don't get celebrated on the ACT or a college application. That weird part, the part that can sing, Disney's show tunes, or can rap, or can tag and do graffiti. Whatever that weird part is that nobody ever talks about, celebrate that part of your kid, right? 90% of the time, I want you enjoying your kids and marveling at the people that you have helped bring into this world up to this point, these unique individuals. This is why we get into the parenting business in the first place, right? This is the joy of it. But it's not just that. It's also money in the emotional bank with your kid. And you're going to need this because there's a 10%. And in that 10%, you are going to have important things that you are going to want to say to your kid. Kids don't take to lectures very well. But if you've invested that 90% in the relationship and the emotional bank account with your child, and you have something to say about drugs or alcohol or sex or health or safety or whatever is important to you, your family credo, your child is far, far more likely to heed your words because you've invested that time, that 90% in them, in your life with them, in your time with them, and you've shown them they're valuable to you. They mean something to you and they're important to you. Crucial stuff. I hope that makes a whole lot of sense. Now, I know that part of our charter here tonight is to talk about drug and alcohol use and abuse. So I wanted to spend a moment before we finished up here talking specifically about that. This is something I deal with incredibly regularly. And there are a few trends I see. We were talking about this before we got started too. The taboo around prescription drugs, vaping, nicotine, marijuana, which the kids call weed, and pills. The taboos are falling away. Kids have redefined what it means to deal drugs. Oh, I'm just working with my friends here. This is no big deal. This is just helping them through math. It's just a Ritalin or an Adderall or a Xanax to keep them calm during the day. So all the things that made us anxious maybe about drugs a generation ago, there is very little taboo now. So when I talk about having this balance in the emotional bank account and open discussions with your kids where you need to learn about their worlds, no place in their lives is this more vital or important than when we're talking about drug and alcohol use and abuse. So what I encourage you to do, and the pandemic is just about the perfect situation, oddly, to be able to do this in because you've got the attention and the time of your child. Don't take 2 hours to lecture them about this, but talk to them about it. Ask them what the vibe is at school with their friends. Ask if they use and what they use and how often they use. For now, in those initial talks, remove judgment from it and just ask what they think of it and what it does for them. If we can get to what it is that they're coping with, whether they're anxious, whether they can't sleep, whether socially they feel disconnected, whether they just want to disappear. All these things are really important because if we know the why, we can work with the why. And then the need for the drug falls away pretty quickly. I want to share with you, before we finish up, one thing that I've been using in the midst of the pandemic that, to my surprise, seems to be working with a number of my adolescent and post-adolescent clients. So for my clients who are using marijuana, for example, about 4 or 5 of them, I've challenged them, take a week off of that. You're home and you have this opportunity. Let's see what it's like not to use anything for a week. And then report back to me what that's like. And what I'm hearing from kids is stunning because so many kids have been using something for so long that to have the brain fog lifted and to feel your full cognitive ability and to feel wide awake for once is novel to an awful lot of our kids. This is really, really important, you guys. And they don't mind it, right? So they're willing to work through some of the whys when they realize, ooh, I don't like being on this drug. I've just been coping with this for so long in this way that I'm used to it. So I encourage you to encourage that experiment for your kids in your home. But I don't take this that lightly. if your child is using in any way, or you suspect they might be, seek out help immediately. It is not lost on me that Maine Prevention Services in Casco Bay are a big part of this talk tonight. I assume, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, that you can seek them out and talk to them and have your child talk to them. And these telesessions are incredibly effective. To my surprise, because I haven't done a whole lot of teletherapy up until about 2.5 months ago, but they're incredibly effective in getting through to young people. So if there's a time to get your kid help in this regard, now, without question, is the time. I strongly urge you to do that. Now, let me end my chattering here on a note of hope. I can imagine that a lot of you who are participating tonight have at least one child that makes you crazy, where you think like, this can't possibly be my kid. They don't care about other people. They have no moral compass. They're using drugs and alcohol. They're getting terrible grades. I really don't like this child very much. I don't think much of this child. I can tell you unequivocally, and the other professionals in this group I think would agree with me, that that child is amazing. I have the luxury of knowing a lot of kids in this generation, and I find them to be the most kind, thoughtful, deep, worldly, caring. I mean, kids now have this worldview because they have access to all the things. They have this worldview about like people are suffering all over the world. People are in pandemics. People are dying as a result of COVID. They're aware of this and they feel that pain. Yes, they feel their typical adolescent pains as well, but they care about other people in a way that I don't think I did when I was a teenager, and I know my cohort didn't. So even the kid that you can't stand right now is a remarkable person. They may not show you, but I promise you, they show me. Over the course of 25 years, I've worked with about 500 kids, and I haven't met one where I'm like, this one I could do without. This one's not that impressive. No, they're all amazing. Your kid's amazing. And part of your job is to find the amazing in them. One last note before we finish up here. A lot of us come to parenting feeling like this is something we do. Parenting is this verb, right? And I get it. There are portals and trackers and books like mine and TED Talks and Zoom sessions telling you this is how you're supposed to parent in the age of anxiety during a pandemic. So of course, parenting is something we do, but being a parent is way more vital and crucial and joyful than all of that. It's the most important thing we're ever going to do. You are a parent to somebody amazing. This is it. This is the most important thing in our lives. So let it be the most beautiful, joyful, messy, difficult, trying, gorgeous part of your life. Let's let it be that, and let's write the better story for ourselves and our families. Thanks so much for listening for a full hour here. I so appreciate that. And now I think we should open up to any questions you might have.
John, this is Phyllis. Can you hear me?
I can, Phyllis. Hi.
I've successfully unmuted. I'm just going to ask one question while I put it out there for any of the attendees. If you have a question for John, if you could email it to me on the side in the chat, and I will read them out to John. That will, I think, be more streamlined. So go ahead and ask any question under the chat feature. John, I was wondering if you could quickly just share the 5-to-1 ratio. It goes along with that 90-10, but I just find it so helpful as a parent.
This is one of the, thank you, Phyllis. This is one of my favorite concepts, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I don't know how I forgot to talk about it during the talk. I was doing some research for a couple I was working with years ago, and trying to figure out, like what's not working in this relationship. And it turns out that research suggested that a couple doesn't have to get along very well. And things do not have to go swimmingly in a relationship. They don't have to have that much in common. They don't have to like each other that much. They don't have to spend a ton of time together. What they do absolutely need in order to have a successful enjoyable, fulfilling relationship is a ratio of 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. And I've been paying attention to the families I've been working with, and I find that that ratio holds absolutely. I want you guys to think about this for a moment, because most families, when they come to me for an initial session, they'll tell me, ooh, I think you mean 1 to 5, right? 1 positive, 5 negative, then we're good, right? Because that's where we are. And I think a lot of us in our families, that's where we are. We're kind of depleted, but it's 5 positive to 1 negative. And if you can start thinking and conceptualizing your relationships with your kids that way, think about the shift in the tone. Think about how much more sway you'll give somebody, a spouse, a friend, a colleague, a child, if they give you that 5 to 1 ratio. So much positive outweighing the negative that the negative barely has any sway. And it might carry some import, but there's a lot of good and a lot of positive interaction. And we don't attend to this very well because we are the can-do parents, right? We're the parents who are going to create the ultimately very successful children. We're the ones who are being labeled lawnmower parents and helicopter parents and tiger parents and all this other stuff, right? But if you can put all that stuff aside and just think 5 positive to 1 negative, your child's going to be more successful, right? This is going to work out better. Your relationship is going to work better. Your words are going to be better heated. Everything I've said over the course of the last hour is going to go far more smoothly if you can create the scenario. And you can start this, by the way, tonight. I was going to say when you get home tonight, and I just realized you're all home. So you can start this in about 15 minutes or so. But I encourage you to do that. And I kind of want to know how it goes, because this, more than anything else, can change the dynamic of a relationship between a parent and child and the tone of a household. Phyllis, thank you so much for that question. I hope I covered it to your satisfaction.
Yep, no, that was perfect. We had one thought that somebody had shared. They said that they're actually really finding this time home with the family very special. And what about their kind of fear of this ending and not having this family time?
Yeah, I've gotten that before, and that's a really good question. First of all, kudos to you for finding this time special, because there are opportunities to create really, really lovely moments during this time. Now, some families are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to make this perfect. There's a difference between perfect and special. Special usually means we get these moments, and I see my kids interacting with each other in a really sweet way. Or we're playing a board game that we would never play otherwise. And I've got my teenager, my 4-year-old playing together, whatever it is. So breathe in that special and really enjoy it. The way to conceptualize the future about that whole situation is keep in mind that you are, during this time, creating a more indelible bond as a family than you would have had without this time. Most of us are really reticent to talk about the positives in the wake of a pandemic. And I get that. I get where an awful lot of people are suffering. Should we really be enjoying any of this time? Or should we really be just informing our kids about why we're doing what we're doing? I think we're doing plenty of that. I think it's okay to cohese as a family and celebrate and enjoy this unexpected time together. It will create resilience for your family going into the future that you might not even know you needed. I feel compelled to share with you briefly a story about my family growing up. There were 4 of us, and my younger brother Tom had some emotional issues, and we didn't do a whole lot together as a family. We didn't vacation. We didn't have special time. And my younger brother took his own life. And we did not manage the fallout of that very well. Not that most families can, but it was very difficult. We felt very disconnected because I don't think we built that emotional bank account and that resilience that we needed for the tough time to come. Now, I don't wish that on any family here. But I think we all know we're going to run into some difficulty in our family. There's going to be some loss somewhere down the line. And that resilience holds a lot of appeal. So the way to conceptualize this is you're building resilience. And if you're enjoying special time now, you're more likely to spend more time together as a family in the future. This is one of the good things I think is going to come out of this very odd time is I think people are finding value in being with their families, whereas it's a very adolescent thing, a very typically adolescent thing to separate yourself, right, from your family. And I want to create a whole separate identity, which is an important part of adolescence, but that doesn't mean you don't enjoy some of your time with your family. And the more your kids and you enjoy this time, the more likely you are to replicate it. And when holidays come along, you're going to enjoy those. And you're going to have these in-jokes and these memories that you're creating during this time. And you're going to be able to tap those and laugh at those and cry at those, probably some of them. And then that will make every family gathering special and every holiday special. And you'll find that you are a more cohesive unit overall going forward. So I don't think you need to look at the lifting of the shelter-in-place order as a loss, but look at all of this time as building this great foundation for a really lovely future for you and your family.
Great. We have another that goes along when you were talking about that sometimes students just need to say the thing and have space for that. But wondering if you can give us some examples of what if your daughter says, I'm dumb or I'm ugly. How do we have her know that we hear her, but how do you do that?
Right. No, that's a great question. And usually the thing is in that vein. And perhaps what I didn't get far enough to say is it's important to acknowledge that they feel the way they do, right? I'm so sorry that you feel that way, because your kid isn't going to bring that to you if they don't mean it. But you also get to say, and it's not taking anything away from them saying the thing, to tell them, but I don't think so. I think you're beautiful. And here's why. You know what I mean? Like, here's how I feel about you. Your beauty, your personality, your very presence is gold to me. And you will never be able to talk me out of that. But I get that you are feeling awful right now. And so I will join you in, it sucks that you have to carry the thing. I don't see that in you. So I think it's important to present your counterpoint, and you're going to feel it almost every time your child comes to you with the thing, because the thing is almost always catastrophic, awful, and temporary. That's another thing I probably ought to point out is parents worry like, oh my gosh, my child hates herself. But usually that's a fleeting thing. It's a circumstantial thing. Something happened socially. And if we remember what it's like to be a teenager, something can be the end of the world one day, 1 minute, 1 hour. And half an hour later, you can feel like, I'm going to go watch my show now. I think I'm good. You know what I mean? Like we know how those emotions can shift and change. So I don't want you to worry too much when your child comes to you with the thing that this is a permanent thing. But if you can let them know you hear them and give them some comfort that, yeah, I don't see that thing, but I hear you. And it sucks that you feel that way. I think you can do both in the same moment. And I think your child will be accepting of that and grateful for it.
Thank you. Terrific again. The next question is about wanting to show the excitement when your child comes into the room, that you brighten when you see them. But what if the child is behind closed doors in their bedroom? How do you make that connection?
Yeah. This is a problem in more and more homes now, right? Our kids have all the means to entertain themselves on earth in the palm of their hands, so they don't need to come out of their rooms very often. So I totally get that. Sometimes when I offer that bit of advice, the implication I think a lot of people carry is, oh man, I need to spend way, way more time with my kid and make sure that I light up for them. I worked with, when my book first came out, I worked with a family, and in the middle of the session, mom started weeping. And she said she was upset with herself because she was trying to put together, on my advice, I will cop to this, she was trying to put together a family meeting every week so that she could show her kids the positive regard, and they could talk about how they were going to be as a family. Her family meeting was supposed to last from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. every Sunday night. She never stood a chance, as we all know. And so I had to tell her, oh yeah, that's never going to happen. None of your kids, your 4-year-old to your 24-year-old to your 14-year-old, none of them are going to be game for that. All you need, you're probably with your teenagers just going to get moments. So I do not expect you to have hours upon hours. Even now, I don't expect that with your kids. I think a lot of people expect, like, because we were hearing early on in the pandemic, families are doing puzzles and playing games together and doing all this stuff together. Hey, if you get some time to do that, fantastic, right? Absolutely take that, create those memories we were talking about a minute ago. If you get 3 minutes where he or she is eating Lucky Charms, and you can say, and you can just light up and say, hey, I love you. I'm really happy to see you today. And what you're likely to get, let me do a preemptive strike here, is, yeah, whatever, mom, or whatever, dad. Yeah, sure, fine. Let them say it. And you can say, I know, you don't have to buy it, you don't have to believe it, but that's just true. And yeah, a perfect, shining retort is not necessary. I called my first book The Available Parent, because really all our kids need to know is that we are available to them and that we have this positive regard for them. They may never thank us for it, and they may never use it. But if you just say to your child on a regular basis, hey, I love you and I care about you, and they roll their eyes, the eye rolling's fine. That's their bit, and they can do that. But you can say, okay, but I still do. And I would leave it at that. And trust that your message is getting across if you do it on a semi-regular basis. I don't even care if you make a bit about it. Like, here comes one of those awkward moments where I tell you how much I'm going to light up for you. And I, like the guy said on the Zoom call the other night, go ahead and do that. Absolutely. You can blame me for sure. But you don't need a reaction, and you don't need hours. If you catch your child when they're heading from their bathroom to back to their bedroom, great. Take that time.
We have another question there. Wanted you to talk a little bit more about disdain, and how often kids just don't feel like they're enough.
Yeah. So this is most everything, for those of you who have read a single word of my book, most everything in there I learned from kids, from teenagers, tweenage kids, young adults. The idea of disdain came from dozens of them. A lot of kids, when they're not told that they are loved and valued on a regular basis, what they sense from mom and dad is disdain. And I will admit that in many therapy sessions with families, I have picked up on disdain coming from mom and dad. You are not the child I raised. I can't believe the disrespect that you're showing your mother and I, or your teachers. I can't believe you're willing to take that drug or get that grade in that class or treat these people this way, whatever it is. Your kid is already anxious. People have asked me, like, how do I know my kid is going to have the grit and resilience to be in the real world? And my answer is always, oh, they're teenagers now. This is a time where kids are gritty and resilient. Just making it through the school day is difficult for a lot of kids when they're carrying all the stress and the burden. They do not have space for your disdain. So if you feel disdain for your child, and some of you may, you need to sit down with a therapist, a spouse, another trusted adult, and work that through, because no child is worthy of disdain, and no child I know now can handle that. They carry, almost as a default, even the brightest kids, the most, the A student who's perfect and beautiful, and the quarterback or the head cheerleader, whatever, has some disdain for him or herself. And you piling on top of that, they do not have the bandwidth for that. That will put them over the edge, and you will start to see them symptomatic. They will become depressed and anxious, and you will see their self-esteem and self-worth plummet very quickly because they hear you. They pick up on your messages, and your messages of disdain do not need to be spoken. You know, sometimes your silence shows disdain. So I really want everybody listening to be keyed in to this idea of disdain, because it is incredibly potent in the minds of your kids. And some parents will come in not knowing why their kids are symptomatic. You know, like we provided him or her with this beautiful life, and they're engaged and they're involved, and, you know, like, what's the problem? And sometimes the problem is just that. They sense disdain coming from you. And sometimes if they don't hear the good stuff, they'll read disdain. It's almost like the glasses that they're looking through, because they carry some of that for themselves. So again, they don't have the bandwidth to carry any from you. So you've got to find a way that lighting up kind of provides you with a different lens through which to see your child on the worst day. That this is the child you've always known. They might be having a difficult time. This might be the time where they're growing and learning about themselves in a way that is non-conventional and not what you would choose. But disdain, there is no room in their lives or their psyches for that. And you will regret showing disdain for them. And if you think about it now, while we're talking, I think you can all agree this is the last vibe you would want to leave any of your children with, is that you carry any disdain for them whatsoever. There's a big difference between, I have a high bar for you because I know you can do well, so I expect you to. I expect you to do well in school. I expect you to be a good person because I know you have that and I know you are that. So I expect that of you, and I'm going to point it out when I don't see it. That's different than disdain. That's constructive criticism and total faith, a show of confidence that your kid can get where you want them to go, in not necessarily the way you want them to get there, right? They'll sometimes have their own paths, but there's no room anywhere for your disdain. Hopefully that's abundantly clear.
Terrific. We have a question around school and homework, and students just really struggling they don't want to hear from their parents how to do it, but they're definitely overwhelmed and stressed, and just wondering, how do we support kids with that school stress?
Yeah. Any idea, Phyllis, offhand, how old we're talking about?
Would be middle school.
Okay. So this is an interesting age, right? Because during middle school, this is when we want our kids to start taking some responsibility for their work, and yet they're not ready to do all of that. That's kind of more what high school is about. So you want to find some balance between, you know, this is your work and I'm willing to help you with this work. This is where, when I wrote my first book, I fought for the word available in the title, and my publisher was like, no, nobody's going to know what that means. The available parent, it is meaningless. But I'm going to explain to you why it means something. Because for your middle schooler who's struggling getting work done and kind of finding that kind of that purchase on their grit and resilience and determination, you want to be available. That is exactly the lane you want to be in. In other words, the idea is that your 7th or 8th grader, you make sure early on, hey, you're the general contractor. You are in charge of your work. I am your advisor. I am your ally. I'm your guide. I'm your consultant. And you let me know if you need help. And I'm going to check the portal, but make sure if you're going to check the portal that they know, and they know how often, and maybe even check it with them, which is my favorite thing if you're going to do that. But you want to shift that relationship from, I'll do some of this for you because it's getting late, to, this is your work and I will help you with it if you need to. Because keep in mind what the goals of parenting are, guys. As far as I'm concerned, when your child heads off into the world when they're 17 or 18 years old to head to college or whatever their next adventure is in life, you want them to be competent and you want them to feel resilient, right? I'm capable of doing what I need to do. If I run into snags, I'm going to be able to handle that, or I will know who to consult to handle that, right? Competence and resilience. If you use those as your North Stars in making parenting decisions, you will probably be in the right lane, making the right decisions. And this is one of those areas, right? For your middle schooler, you're trying to help them establish a sense of competence and resilience. When you put them to bed at night, you ideally want to be able to say, hey, good job with the way you handled that today. You know, not good job for you. This isn't your grade. This isn't your school. And your middle schoolers well aware of that, right? So don't do the work for them and don't organize the work for them. Put them in charge of it and let them know you're available. You can let me know if you need help. And even if they ask you for some help, you still have the ability to say, you did a good job. And you asked me for help at exactly the right time. Well done. If you can do that at the end of the day, you are building competence and resilience as you go. So your job as a parent isn't to do the teaching, isn't to write the papers, isn't to organize the homework. There are consequences, very natural consequences that befall our kids if they fail these things. And some failure is completely okay. Some consequences for things that weren't done properly, completely okay. Kids learn from these things. The more we do for our kids, the less we can say at the end of the day, good job, you're competent and you're resilient. And we'll know it, right? And this stuff has legs. A few years on, when you're sending them off to college, I've worked with way too many parents of juniors and seniors in high school who will bring them into me at that point and say, I don't know if we've set them up for this very well. I'm worried about whether they're going to make it out there in the world, out there in college on their own, right? But if you start in middle school, building that competence and resilience, then you're doing it right. And picture that day when you drop off your child at college, for example, you'll know, like, I think he or she's going to be just fine, going to be okay. And that, I got to tell you, I've been there. That's a really amazing feeling as a parent. But the opposite is a terrifying feeling. And we want to spare ourselves that, and we want to spare our kids that feeling.
Great. Just a one, it looks like we probably have time for one last question. I just wondered, because Casco Bay Cam's hosting this, if you could talk a little bit about alcohol. And you had mentioned in your book that you should start talking to your children between ages 8 and 9, and then kind of morph it into different types of conversations. I didn't know if you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to. So when I say that in a public forum, I usually get a little bit of a gasp, like, ooh, I don't feel comfortable like introducing these topics to my very young children. I'm afraid that they're going to be suggestible, and by the time they're 11 or 12, this is going to be ordinary to them, and they're going to be more likely to use. That is a misnomer. That is not how it works. I find, and I would guess that if there are certified alcohol and drug counselors on the line, they'll agree with me that the more open we are with our kids, and the more we have an open dialogue about the nature of alcohol use and abuse, our stories, whether there's alcoholism in the family, all of this stuff is really important for our kids to hear. And your 8-year-old has access to information about all this stuff. When you talk about alcohol or drugs with young kids, you're, unfortunately, I think, you're not introducing them to something new. So you're actually giving them good information, because if you don't come in at 8, 9, 10, or 11, somebody will, who's probably going to be 8, 9, 10, or 11 and might have an older brother or sister and is going to deliver some terrible misinformation, right? And then all of a sudden you get young kids experimenting with drugs. So you want to open up a dialogue, and way too many parents want this to be a one and done, alcohol and drugs are bad. It's really important that you not use them. Okay, I've done my parenting duty. I'm out. This has to be an open and ongoing conversation. So this isn't a one and done. This is a never done. This is something you need to be available to talk to your kids about all the way through their childhood and adolescent and even young adult life for a lot of kids, for most every kid. So start the conversation early. That doesn't mean that you have to talk about like, this is the darkness of alcoholism and what's going to happen to you if you start drinking. But you can start talking about like what alcohol does, why people drink, and ask them what they know about it. So with young kids, I think the most useful thing is to draw it out of them. Tell me what you know about alcohol, and what do you think it's about? Why do you think you see adults drinking sometimes and never kids? And kids will take that ball and run with it. This is like the sex talk. You're going to be really uncomfortable getting this started, but your 8, 9, 10-year-old won't be so uncomfortable. This won't be so awful for them. This will be pretty normal for them to talk about. So be really willing to engage in that discussion. And I find that if you want to build resilience in a kid around all of this stuff, start that conversation early and make it an open conversation and an ordinary conversation, something that you bring up on a pretty regular basis. And if you don't know exactly how to do that, I always encourage the judicious use of the pause button. So there aren't many shows that you're going to binge watch right now with your kids on TV outside of the cartoon universe where somebody isn't drinking, right? So pause and ask your 10-year-old, what do you think is going on here? What do you think happens next? How do you think he feels? Ask those questions and you start to build up some emotional intelligence around alcohol and drug use. But mostly you're sending this message that I'm a safe person to come to. You can always come to me and talk about this. And I'm telling you, I've been delivering this message for years now. And parents will tell me when their kids are 12, 13, 14, that they talk to them openly about what goes on at school, who's using things, why they're using, what they think of it, whether they're considering it. So make that an open conversation, and then you have information that you can work with, right? Because I'm working with an awful lot of parents who are just in the dark. And for those of you who are not familiar, kids are incredibly clever about alcohol and drug use. They know how to hide this stuff. They know that a water bottle filled with vodka looks like a water bottle. They know that a jewel is that big and will fit underneath a ledge in their desk. So if they're inclined, they can hide an awful lot that you couldn't hide when you were their age. We don't want to create this cloak and dagger, I'm the cop, you're the criminal kind of atmosphere in our homes. Ideally, you want this to be collaboration. That's the goal with all of this stuff. And if you run into trouble, seek help.
Terrific. Well, I could go on all night with you. You were really terrific. There's been comments on the side saying that as well. I just feel in this anxious time that your talk just sort of took me down a couple notches. That again, we're all in this parenting together, and there are some things we can do, and really, really appreciate what you've said tonight.
Oh, and thank you all for joining. And I so appreciate you. And I always feel like when I'm talking to a group of parents like this, I'm preaching to the choir. So I suspect a lot of you know a lot of this stuff already, but hopefully there's a few reminders in there that you can make use of.
And we will record this and put this out for people. So if you enjoyed this, please let your friends know how they can access this. It'll be on Casco Bay Can's website. And John, we'd love to get you here for some lobster rolls at some point.
Oh, do not tease me with that.
Yeah.
That would be terrific. I look forward to it.